In today's video, we're going to be learning how to create an interactive infographic using R and a tool called Displayr, or maybe it's Displayr, I'm not sure. And more specifically, in this video, we're going to work towards creating the infographic that you see on your screen right now. So this was created using a template from Canva as the starting point, and then I went in and I added in some data from Statistics Canada, and then I made the infographic interactive. So if I scroll down here, there are 3 parts that will update depending on this drop down right here. So this infographic is about heart disease, and it contains statistics related to heart disease in Canada based on age group. So right now I have the all ages age group selected, and this element right here says that for the all ages age group, heart disease is the number 2 leading cause of death in 2020. It also says that the percentage of deaths due to heart disease in 2020 was 18%. And we can see the trend over time of the number of deaths that were due to heart disease in Canada per year. And if I scroll over top of these, there's little tooltips that pop up that show us the specific values for each of those years. The infographic does update when you change the values. For example, if we go to 90 years and over, then heart disease now becomes the number 1 leading cause of death for this age group. And the number of deaths due to heart disease for this age group is increasing over time, which probably is a result of population growth. To create the non-interactive aspects of this infographic, I used a Canva template, which I found by just typing infographic into Canva and then scrolling and looking for one that I liked the look of. So I actually started with this template right here, and then I modified it quite a bit, and I won't show all the steps of how I did that, but if we just compare what the two of them look like, we can see that I added in some tips to reduce risk of heart disease rather than the template, which originally was about heart attacks. And I added some icons that were in Canva just to fill up the space a little bit more. And then in the middle part of the infographic, what you want to do is actually leave blank space in the template anywhere where there's going to be an interactive element. So here where this pie chart is, what you would need to do is actually delete that so that there's a blank space. And same thing here with this 1029. We want to get rid of that because we want to put an interactive element in that blank space right there. And same thing down here, we want to leave a blank space where that bar chart is going to go. And then the rest of the steps is just about making it look how you want it to look. So modifying the default text that's found in the template in order to have it make sense with the data that you're trying to visualize. And then at the bottom, I just put the sources where I got the information in the infographic from. So really the key part here is just making sure that you have blank spaces anywhere that you're going to have an interactive element in the infographic, which also includes, in our case, a blank space for the dropdown. So here, having this blank spot will let us put in the dropdown using Displayr. And after making all of those edits, this is what my infographic looked like before I brought it into Displayr. So any of the text that can be static is done at the step of Canva, and anything that is interactive will be once we actually go into Displayr. We're going to start with the data that we'll be using for this infographic, and I pulled this data from a Statistics Canada table called Leading Cause of Death, Total Population by Age Group. And then there's another source on here that was from the Public Health Agency of Canada, and that's actually an infographic called Heart Disease in Canada, and that's where I got the information up here about ways to reduce your risk of heart disease. For now, let's start with the Statistics Canada table. And once I'm on the correct table, the first thing that I'm going to do is download the entire table. There's a bunch of different download options, but if you go down to the very bottom, the last CSV option says download entire table. Next, we're going to pop into our studio and create a new R script, and we're going to do some data cleaning in order to get the data into a format that can work with this tool for creating infographics. The most difficult part of using this tool is getting the data in the correct format, so that's where I'd like to start. First, I'm going to load the tidyverse, and next I'm going to load the table that we just downloaded. And I've already gone and unzipped the file. There should be two CSV files when you download the zip folder, one for the actual data set itself, and then also a CSV file containing metadata information about the table. I'm going to call this data frame heart, and I'll use the read_CSV function to read in that table. Let's take a quick look at the structure of this data frame. This format will look fairly familiar to you if you've worked with Statistics Canada data tables before, but if you haven't, they do generally all have the same structure. Most of these variables are not ones that we'll need, and the ones that we are going to be interested in for this infographic will be the date, and that's so that we can create this bar chart over time. We also want the age at time of death. This is going to be what we use for that drop down that was on the infographic. So we'll need that age at time of death variable. We're also going to need the leading causes of death so that we can filter down to heart disease. We'll need this column called characteristics because we'll need the number of deaths for the bar chart. We'll need percentage of deaths for the pie chart. And we will need rank of leading causes of death for this text box right here. And the only other column here that we will need is the actual value itself. Everything else can go. So let's start by using the select function to subset only the variables that we need. So we'll modify the heart data frame to be the heart data frame piped to the select function, and we want to keep ref date, age at time of death, leading causes of death, characteristics, and value. And the only other one that we're going to need is going to be the sex variable. And we're only going to need that just so that we can filter down to the both sexes. So I won't be using the breakdown between male versus female, but I do need that variable for right now so that I can do that filtering. Oh, and I have a typo here. This should say leading causes of death. Next, I'm going to rename these columns just to make them a little nicer to work with. And to do that, I'll use the call names function, and I'm going to assign new names for each of these variables. So for ref date, I'm going to call that year. Age at time of death, I'll just call age. Then sex. Let's call causes of death cause. For characteristics, I'm going to call that stat for statistic. And then value is the last variable that we have. Next, we're going to filter out any of the rows that aren't about heart disease. So we're assigning the heart data frame to be the heart data frame where we filter down to the cause of death being called diseases of heart. And then once we do that filtering, we actually don't need that column anymore, so we can drop the cause column. Let's also filter out the information that was broken down by sex. And similarly to before, we're taking the heart data frame and we're filtering it down, but this time we're selecting sex equals both sexes. And then we're going to, again, drop that column since we no longer will need that. We're almost done with the cleaning of this data frame, but there's a couple more things we need to do to make things look a bit prettier. If we take a look at the age column, we notice that they all start with age at time of death. So that first part is not super valuable information, and we would rather just keep the part that says the age group after the comma. So next I'm going to use the substring function to remove that age at time of death part of that variable. Again, I'm going to assign the heart data frame to be heart, but we're going to use the mutate function to convert the age variable into a substring of the age variable, where we want to take only the second half of the string. And in order to use the substring function, we're going to need to figure out the character position where we would like to start the string from. So in order to figure that out, I'm going to use the nchar function to figure out the number of characters that's in the string age at time of death with a comma and a space. And that part is 22 characters long, which means we want to start our string at character number 23, and we want to stop the string at whatever the last character of that variable is. And we can obtain that by using the nchar function. If we run that, the age has now been subsetted down, but for this first value here, which is all ages, we probably want that first letter to be capitalized to make everything look a little bit nicer. And to do that, we can again use the mutate function. And this time we're going to mutate the age variable. We're going to use the if-else function. And the condition that we want to test is whether or not age is equal to all ages in lowercase letters. And if age is equal to all ages, then we instead want it to say all ages but with a capital A. And if the age variable is not equal to that string, then we just want the age variable to take on whatever value it had otherwise. And if we run that, the age variable should now be good to go. And we are now done with the data cleaning portion. And now we can start working on creating the data sets that we will eventually upload into Displayr. There's going to be 4 different aspects of the infographic that we need to create tables for to upload into Displayr. And the first one is going to be the levels of the age group variable. So we'll need to create a table that contains all of these values, which we can just do using the unique function. And we want the unique values of the age variable from the heart data frame. And we will eventually use that to populate the dropdown option. And let's assign that to a variable called ages. And that's the first element of 4. For our second element, we want to create this text box that says what place it is in terms of the rank of the leading cause of death for that specified age group. So I'll create a data frame called lead, and I'll take the heart data frame, and I'm going to filter down to the rows that say rank of leading causes of death. And since it's the leading cause of death in 2020, I'm also going to filter down to the year being 2020. And then we don't want those variables to be part of this lead data frame anymore. So we can use the select function to remove the stat and year columns from that data frame. And finally, Displayr is going to expect the table that we give it to be in a wide format rather than a long format. So we'll need to use the pivot wider function to take this data frame and make it wide instead of long. So ultimately we want to have 1 column per age group, and then along the rows we'll have the associated values. Inside of the pivot wider function, we'll tell it that the names should come from the age variable and the values should come from the value column. If we take a look at that, this is the format that Displayr is going to expect as input. We've now finished element 2 of 4, and for the third element, we need a table that contains the information for the pie chart that shows what percentage of deaths is due to heart disease in 2020. It's going to be very similar to what we just did, And in fact, I'm going to start by copying and pasting what we had before and just modifying it where needed. Let's change the name of this data frame to say percentage death. And this time the statistic that we want is the percentage of deaths. And that's actually all we need to change. This is almost in the format that Displayr is going to expect from us, but we're going to need to add a second row that shows the other portion of the pie chart. Right now, we have the darker blue portion of the pie chart that shows the percentage of deaths that's due to heart disease, but we'll need a second row in the data frame for the remaining percentage. We're going to call that other, and calculating that is going to be really simple. We're just going to take 100 and then minus the percentage that's due to heart disease. So I will add a row to the percentage underscore death data frame that we just created. And we can use the add row function. And the value that we need in the second row is going to be equal to 100 minus this vector, which is the first row of that data frame. So 100 minus the first row of the percentage death data frame. If we take a look at that, we've now got both of the rows, but we also should give more useful row names instead of just saying 1 and 2. So we can use the row.names function applied to the percentage death data frame to label the first row as heart disease and the second row as other. And this data frame is now in the format that's expected for a pie chart in Displayr. And finally, we'll need to create the data frame that corresponds to this bar chart right here for the number of deaths. I'll call this data frame numDeath, and we'll do the same thing that we did before at the start, which is we'll filter down to the rows of the heart data frame where the statistic is equal to the statistic of interest, which in this case is number of deaths. And then we're going to remove the stat column from the numDeath data frame, except what's different this time is that we're going to keep the year column instead of filtering down to just 2020, since we do want this information over time. And then we're going to pivot wider just like we did before. And again, the names are coming from the age column and the values are coming from the value column. And this data frame is now ready to be passed on to Displayr. And that actually concludes the code that we'll be writing from within our studio, and all of the rest of the R code is going to go into Displayr directly. So now that we have the Canva template ready and all of the R code written so that we can copy and paste the tables in the correct format, we are now ready to use Displayr to make the infographic interactive. If you don't already have a Displayr account, you will need to make one. And once you have one, you can start by creating a new document and just create a blank document. And once that loads, you can give the document a name. And this is the name that will be visible publicly whenever you send the link to someone to the infographic. Over on the right panel, under Page, the first thing that we're going to do is change the page size, and we're going to make it custom. And we want the size to be the same as the template that we're working with. If I open this up in Paint really quick, I can see that this is 800 pixels by 1740. You can play around with the pixels per inch if you want, but as long as you have something that is the same ratio, it should be fine. So if I make the width 8 inches and the height 17.4, then that should be the correct size for the infographic. Next, I'll go to Image and then browse your computer. And I'm going to select the template that I made using Canva. And I'll resize it so that it takes up the full space of the document. Next, let's add our dropdown for the age groups. To do that, we'll go to the anything, and then page design, control, and then combo box, which says dropdown in brackets. And that plops on a dropdown for us. So we'll resize it as we like. And under the control box on the right, we're going to make this look the way that we want it to. So we can change the font size and font type. Let's go with size 20 font, and we can change the background color to whatever we like. If I look back in Paint, the color that I want for that orange is given by this hex code. So if I go to more colors, I can manually type in the hex code right here, which was FB6540. So now it matches everything else. And I'm going to make the font color itself white, and I'm going to remove the border. Now to populate the options under the dropdown, we first need to add the data frame that we created in RStudio to populate the age group dropdown. I'm going to rerun that, and I'm going to use the right clip function from the Clipbar package to copy ages onto my clipboard. And then in Displayr, I'm going to go to Insert a Table, and then Paste or Enter Table. And it tells us there are 3 different options. We can either paste or type data, or add our data set in a couple of different ways, but we're going to go with the paste or type data. And if I click that, it prompts me to click this big red button right here that says paste or type data. And then in here, I'm going to paste what I copied to my clipboard. And then I'll press OK. And under the Properties tab, if we go to General, I'm going to rename the default name of this table to be Ages. And then on the table itself, I'm going to right-click it and select Hide. That's going to make the table invisible when other people are viewing your infographic, but it's still visible to you while you're editing it. We're then going to resize this table, make it pretty small, and drag it out of the way. Going back to the dropdown, we'll go to the Properties tab, and we're going to rename this as well, and we're going to call this Age Dropdown. And we will need to remember what we named it, because in order to create the other interactive elements, we will need to use that age_dropdown name inside of our R code. Next, I'll go to Control, and then we want to have the dropdown items be selected from the Ages table. And then we'll just erase this, so instead of it saying first option and second option, by default it's going to pick the first value that's in the Ages table that we created before. Next, let's add the text for the leading cause of death in 2020. This time we're going to go to Calculation and then click Custom Code. And we can see when we hover over that, it says Write R code. We're going to draw a box in the location where we want the custom code to be applied. And for right now, I'm just going to put a bit of placeholder code because we will need to upload the table that contains the leading cause of death in 2020. So for right now, I'm just going to put the number sign there. And we're also going to modify the appearance, but first I need to click Calculate. So now if I zoom in, we can see that it has executed that R code, which for right now is just put the number sign there. But if we go to Appearance, we can increase the font size, and I'm going to make the font white, and I'm going to stretch this box out a little bit, and I'll put it right there. And now in order to add the interactive bit of this, we're going to need to upload this leading cause of death table. Again, I'm going to copy that data frame onto my clipboard by using the right clip function from the Clipbar package. And then I'll go to Table, Paste or Enter Table, and then Paste or Type Data. which prompts us to click the red button. And then we can paste this in and click OK. Right-click the table and click Hide. Resize the table and move the table out of the way. And make sure that under Properties, the name of the table is a name that makes sense. So to keep it consistent with our code from before, let's call this table lead. And then we can go back to the interactive element that we created and we can modify the R code accordingly. And the text that we want displayed there is going to be the number sign pasted together with the lead data frame, and we want it to take the value that corresponds with the age dropdown. And then if we click calculate, I get an error saying subscript is out of bounds, so I need to remove the quotations around age dropdown. If I click the calculate button again, that should work. And let's make this bold and center it a little bit. Next, we want to create the pie chart. Let's start by adding the data for it this time. So we'll go to Table, then Paste or Enter Table, Paste or Type Data, click the red button, and then we can paste this into here from RStudio. So I'm going to copy the percentage death data frame onto my clipboard, again by using the right clip function from the clipr package, and then pasting that in and clicking OK. Going to right click to hide this and resize the table, move it out of the way, and then we will rename the table to %_death, just like we called it in RStudio. And now we can add the code element right here by going to calculation and then custom code, and we draw a little box where we want that custom code to be applied. Under our code, it's going to be a little more complicated this time, so I'll paste it in first and then we can talk about it line by line. We'll be using the flip standard charts package, and then there's a function inside of that package called chart, and then this function takes a bunch of arguments. So the first argument is going to be the data that we'd like to use for the pie chart, which is going to be the %_death data frame that we created from before. And again, we're going to select the age drop down so that it matches up with what the user has selected on the drop down. Here we're specifying that the type is a pie chart. Here I'm choosing the two colors of the pie chart and the color of the font, which matches up with the color of the heart disease portion of the pie chart. I'm specifying the font size and the font family. I'm also saying that I want there to be 0 decimals past the decimal place, and then we want a % symbol at the end of the text. And the reason why it's not showing up yet is because I just need to make this a little bit bigger and then move it accordingly. And finally, we want to create the bar chart for the number of deaths over time. Let's start again by pasting in the table that contains the data. We'll click the red button to paste or type the data and use the right clip function from the clipr package to copy the num death data frame onto the clipboard, and then we can paste it in here and click OK. Right click the table to hide it, make it smaller, and then drag the table out of the way. We'll add a custom code element to this part of the infographic, and then under the R code, again I'm going to copy and paste what it looks like and then talk about what each part of it does. And I just realized I forgot to rename this table, so let's start by doing that. And I'm going to rename it to num_death. And then in the custom code, again, we're using the chart function from the flip standard charts package. First, we specify the data that we want to be used for the bar chart, which is the num death data frame, but where we're selecting the age dropdown information. This time the type is a column chart, and here we're just specifying a lot of little details about how we want the plot to look. Here we're specifying that we want the background colors to be this light blue color so that it almost looks like it's transparent. This part right here, we're saying that we want the color of the bars themselves to be that orange color from before. Here, as well as down here and down here, I'm saying that I want the text associated with this chart to be that navy blue color. And then there's also some fiddling around with the font family here and here, as well as the font sizes. And we're also adding a format to the y-axis to add a comma in the thousands place. Now there's something pretty weird that you'll notice here, which is that rather than displaying as the years, it ends up getting displayed as a bunch of numbers, even though if we look at the data itself, it has been inputted as years. I'm not sure if there's a better workaround for this, but the workaround that I've found is to take one of the rows in the table and make it more like a character instead of a number. And then if I click OK, it converts it into numbers like that. And then it's just a matter of sort of fiddling around with the sizes. Something like that, maybe. I'll go with that and then just move it ever so slightly. And that's all there is to it. The only thing that's left is to make this visible for other people. And to do that, you can just go to Publish and then Publish as Web Pages. And if you go to Public on the Web, that's the only option that's free, unfortunately. But if you click Publish, it'll generate a link for you, and then you can open that link, and you can send this link to anyone, and they'll see what you see here. And those tables that we had from before that were hidden, they don't show up in this view of the infographic. And you can interact with the infographic by using the dropdown. For example, if we switch this to 90 years and over, all three of these elements will be updated. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found it helpful. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please be sure to subscribe to my channel so that I can keep making videos like this.